Preschool is a scary and exciting time for both children and adults. For many parents, this will be their first adventure with the public school system. For preschool teachers, it is a chance to make an impression on children and families that may impact their opinion of how well the school serves their needs. The number of students attending publicly supported preschool continues to grow. A recent study shows that when looking at the 4-year-old children in this country, about 35% of them are in publicly supported programs. With so many students in preschool, it is apparent that there is a need for high-quality preschool classrooms. My name is Brittany Kinzer, and I'm a graduate student at Georgetown College, and I will be presenting my Capstone research project as part of the completion of my master's degree. I am also a preschool teacher in a rural elementary school in South Central Kentucky. Throughout my career, I have talked with many preschool teachers about their struggle with maintaining a classroom that they feel is appropriate for their students, while also pleasing administration and making sure their students leave the classroom at the end of the year ready for kindergarten. In my own classroom, part of my professional growth plan is to continue to research and study on what I can do to make my classroom one that is not only appropriate, but also challenging for my students. Through discussions with colleagues about their experiences in working in the Kentucky school system, I began to wonder what differences there were between teachers and administrators on their views for the preschool classroom. The discussion with my colleagues and my own personal experiences within the public school system led to the development of my research question: how do the administrators and preschool teachers define developmentally appropriate practice in Kentucky preschool classrooms, and what implications may such views have for classroom instruction? I will address this question in 3 steps. First, I will discuss relevant literature on related topics to establish a professional background for the research. Second, I will discuss the research procedures, data collection, and results of the research conducted for this study. And finally, I will attempt to answer the research question with help from the literature and data collected. When looking at the literature to establish a background for my research questions, I focused on 3 areas to address and research resources from a variety of disciplines. The first thing I needed to do was to establish the purpose and importance of preschool in order to ensure that this research question had significance. As stated earlier, Carol Koppel and Sue Brandicap reported that in 2009 there were 35% of 4-year-olds within the country that attended some type of publicly supported program. On May 2, 2017, the Kentucky Department of Education released education facts from the 2015-2016 school year, indicating that 32,278 children in the state of Kentucky received services from either state-funded classrooms or through the Head Start program. The state of Kentucky has 4 eligibility requirements for parents who wish to enroll their children into the state-funded preschool programs. First, they must be a resident of the district in which they wish to enroll. Second, they must be 4 years old by August 1st of the school year. Third, they must be approved for free lunch based upon the federal free lunch criteria. And fourth, a child who is not eligible for the free lunch program but is 4 by August 1st may also be enrolled if there is space available to serve that child. Additionally, the Individuals with Disability Education Act also requires school systems to begin providing services for children with disabilities starting at the age of 3. So those children that have disabilities are also eligible for enrollment into preschool regardless of income. So it can be established that the purpose of preschool is to provide an earlier education for students that are considered high risk or at risk, a term that is often used to describe children that come from lower income households or that have developmental delays or a disability at such a young age. The importance of preschool we can establish by looking at various literature. Taylor, Bibbs, and Slate investigated the effect of preschool attendance on school readiness among early elementary students. They found that students who attended preschool exhibited higher overall pass scores, higher physical scores, and higher personal scores on the Georgia Kindergarten Assessment Program. They stated that our findings, though preliminary in nature, support attendance at preschool over non-attendance for students identified as being at risk. In their study into the benefits of various types of preschool programs, Fuller, Bain, Bridges, Kim, and Hesketh looked into whether attending a preschool program made any differences for students entering into the kindergarten classroom. After the research, the authors concluded that among the subset of children who had entered kindergarten, any form of earlier preschool attendance yielded significant advantages relative to the reference group being those in kindergarten that had not attended any type of preschool program. Rebecca Markin in 2002 looked at a longer long-term effect of preschool on students. She studied the impact that preschool made on children who made the transition from 3rd to 4th grade. Her data showed that children whose preschool experience was child-initiated fared better than peers in the transition from the primary to the later elementary school grades. Not only were their overall grades following their transition significantly higher, their school performance improved or held constant in all but 2 subject areas, despite the increased academic demands of the next grade level. Now that we have established that there is a purpose and importance to preschool for students, we can look closer into one of the philosophies of early childhood education. The first part of the research question looks at how administrators and teachers define developmentally appropriate practice. Before asking that question, however, I had to first define developmentally appropriate practice using literature. The term developmentally appropriate practice was developed by the National Association for the Education of Young Children, also known as NAEYC, in 1986. NAEYC released an updated version of their book in 2009 titled Developmentally Appropriate Practice in Early Childhood Education. Developmentally appropriate practice is based upon 3 core considerations, including knowing about child development and learning, knowing what is individually appropriate, and knowing what is culturally appropriate for students. When using these concepts of developmentally appropriate practice, teachers create instruction that is suitable to the child's learning and development, as well as challenging so that it will promote their growth. For the teacher, this means that they make decisions about instruction based upon the group of students that are in their class. They must, however, also consider the individual needs of their students and adapt their instruction to meet those individual needs. NAEYC is hopeful that by using developmentally appropriate practice, teachers will be able to help bridge the achievement gap of students who are in high-risk demographic groups. Kentucky also has a definition of developmentally appropriate practice within their preschool regulations. According to Kentucky regulations, developmentally appropriate practice means a program that focuses on the physical, intellectual, social, and emotional development of young children. So if teachers need to be using developmentally appropriate practice in their classrooms, how can they know that the skills they are working on are appropriate for their students? Koppel and Brendicap believe that the focus for preschool teachers should not just be on the academics of students, but on all developmental levels. Passion-Deslesky and Beaucamp in 2005 also agree that the focus of the classroom should not just be on academics. According to them, learning to identify and manage emotions, to make good decisions, to behave morally and responsibly, and to develop positive relationships are just as vital to successfully negotiating the world as learning letters, numbers, and shapes in preschool. The definition of school readiness in Kentucky is that each child enters school ready to engage in and benefit from early learning experiences that best benefit the child's success. In 2003, the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards were developed that provided educators working with students from the age of birth through 4 a guideline for what children of those ages should be able to know and do. The standards are broken down into 2 main sections: standards for birth to 3-year-old children and standards for children 3 to 4 years old. Within the 3 to 4-year-old section, there are 7 areas that contain standards that teachers are expected to address in the classroom, and those are listed on the poster. Within recent years, the Kentucky Department of Education passed a regulation that requires all kindergarten students to be screened using the Brigance Early Childhood Screen 3. The Brigance is a developmental screening that is meant to provide a quick and accurate assessment of a child's development in 5 areas: academic and cognitive, language development, physical development, self-help, and social-emotional development. Within the first 30 instructional days of the school year, every kindergarten student must be assessed using this screener. The data is then placed into a software program, and it will label the child as not ready, ready, or ready with enrichments for those students that do exceptionally well. What does this have to do with developmentally appropriate practice? The challenge for preschool teachers is that the Brigance also connects the scores of the kindergarten students to the preschool program that they attended, adding pressure to preschool teachers to make sure their classroom is producing students who are ready for kindergarten. If the questions on the Brigance are not what preschool teachers feel are developmentally appropriate, but they are pressured into teaching those skills in hopes of students scoring higher on the Brigance, would this affect their ability to use developmentally appropriate practice? Through communication with the professional community and by researching the various literatures related to this study, I was able to define my research question, as stated earlier, to learn how administrators and preschool teachers in Kentucky define developmentally appropriate practice and what this means for classroom instruction. To learn more about this question, I decided to use a type of research that Craig Mertler calls action research. In the field of education, this type of research works well because action research is a systematic inquiry that is conducted by educators for the purpose of gathering information about how their school functions, how students learn, and/or how they teach. Action research is done by teachers, for teachers, in working with students and colleagues, and should address realistic classroom problems or issues. My research question will look into how particular schools operate as far as how well administrators and preschool teachers agree on what is appropriate for preschool classrooms and how this affects classroom instruction. I needed to collaborate with colleagues in order to answer this research question. The specific method that I have chosen to use is a triangulation mixed methods approach. This approach uses both quantitative and qualitative data collection to help assure validity in the data. For my quantitative data, I will be using surveys with multiple choice questions. This will allow for easy comparison between questions to see if survey participants were in agreement with their answers. The qualitative data will be collected through interviews and open-ended questions on the surveys. By using both types of research to address my research question, I can compare the results between the types of data to see if the responses are similar and can be considered valid data. Within this research project, I sought a variety of technology resources throughout my process to support my research, analyze data, reflect on that data, and draw conclusions from my research. Search engines and online databases were used to research literature to be used in the professional background. The website SurveyMonkey was used in the creation and distribution of the letters of consent for both the surveys and interviews, as well as the surveys themselves. To ensure the privacy of all participants, the surveys were collected anonymously so that no data could be traced back to those who had completed them. After the completion of this project, the surveys and their data will be deleted from the website, and any data that was printed will be shredded so that all data will be destroyed. The program Microsoft Excel was used to analyze data and create visual charts and graphs. The program Microsoft PowerPoint was used in the creation of the research poster, and the software Screencast-O-Matic was used to produce the narration for the presentation. To ensure confidentiality and ethical use, I also reviewed my school and district's acceptable use policy for technology. In reading the policy, I made sure to follow all copyright and fair use laws to use the data I collected for the specific educational purpose for which I had intended, and to make sure that I used the data and research collected in an ethical manner. Data collection started following the approval of the Institutional Review Board Committee for my research project. I sent out an email to potential participants within the state of Kentucky asking for their willingness to complete either a survey or an interview. Within that email was a link to the letter of consent that all participants were asked to sign electronically. For the surveys, once the letter of consent was submitted, the link to the survey was provided on the website SurveyMonkey. The preschool teachers were asked to answer 25 questions, and administrators were asked to answer 24 questions. Many of the questions between the two surveys were identical or very similar, so that the results could be analyzed and compared. A sample of some of the survey questions is provided on the poster. For the interviews, participants were contacted via email to schedule their appointment. Once they had signed the letter of consent, they were then given the choice of a face-to-face interview or an interview over the phone. All participants chose an interview over the phone. The interview for preschool teachers consisted of 18 questions, while the administrator interview had 17 questions. Again, many of the questions were identical to allow for easier comparison. Also, many of the questions were very similar to those in the survey, so that a comparison between the quantitative data and the qualitative data could be made. A sample of interview questions is provided on the poster. To ensure the privacy of the interviewees, no identifying information was collected with their answers. Interviewees were simply listed as Interview 1, Interview 2, etc. Just as the surveys, upon the completion of this research project, all notes and data will be shredded to ensure the confidentiality of participants. The data from the surveys was placed into Microsoft Excel and then analyzed to show the frequency of answers between participants. The responses from the two groups were then able to be placed into visual graphs where the two groups can be compared. The data from the interviews was analyzed using a line-by-line analysis of questions that were relevant to the literature and results found in the surveys. This data was encoded and the information was placed into tables. When looking at my participants, there were a total of 18 preschool teachers, all female, who filled out the surveys. The participants had anywhere between 5 and 26 or more years of teaching experience. There were 8 administrators, 3 males and 5 females who participated in the surveys. 5 of the participants were preschool directors and 3 elementary school principals, with their experience ranging from less than 5 years to 26 or more years of experience as an administrator. Participants for the interviews included 3 preschool teachers, all of them female, with participants having between 5 and 17 years of experience, and 2 administrators, both male and elementary school principals, that participated. One had 3 years of administrative experience, while the other had 5. These participants were chosen due to their direct correlation to my research question, and all participants work within the public school systems in the state of Kentucky. Looking at the results from my surveys and my interviews, we can see Figure 1 shows the data from the question, what is the biggest benefit for children that attend preschool? Most participants in both groups answered the question with high-risk students are given a head start in the school system, the purpose that we established in the literature. For those participants that chose other, all replied with answers of all of the above. The answers from the interviews varied, with most of the answers being more specific. One administrator said social interaction and school routine, while the second administrator said preschool provides an opportunity to learn to share, follow instructions, and begin the foundation for learning that will occur in elementary school. For the preschool teachers, 2 stated kindergarten readiness and 1 stated being able to receive services. When looking at the data from both sources, the interviewees tended to have a more specific response, but the preschool teachers in the interviews did show answers in connection to the answers of those in the survey. Figure 2 shows the question that is directly related to my research question, where participants in the surveys were asked to choose the definition they felt best fit the term developmentally appropriate practice. The data shows that the majority of participants chose the definition provided by NACE. When looking at the responses from the interviews, the majority of participants noted some important concept from the NACE definition, including teach each child individually, meeting students where they are, and creating an environment and doing tasks that are skill appropriate for the child's age. The use of the triangulation mixed method allows for the comparison of quantitative and qualitative data to establish validity in the answers. When looking at the responses from the survey and interview questions, we can tell that both groups share the same overall understanding of the term developmentally appropriate practice and that the data can be considered valid. We can also make the inference from data that administrators and teachers both recognize the core considerations and are mostly in agreement as to the definition of the term. One of the questions asked on both the surveys and the interviews was for participants to list the 3 skills and/or behaviors that they felt were important for kindergarten readiness. Within the survey, this was an open-ended question, so the answers were coded into the 7 areas shown. When looking at the graph, it is obvious that teachers and administrators are very similar in what they feel is important for kindergarten readiness. Academic and adaptive skills were the top 2 answers from both groups. Adaptive skills are skills that include not only being able to take care of personal or self-care needs, but also include the ability to follow school rules and routines. Teachers identified 2 areas not mentioned by administrators, such as attitude and cognitive. The interviews revealed similar answers. 2 preschool teachers and both administrators listed some type of academics as important. The same was for adaptive skills. Other skills mentioned included social, motor, and language. Again, we can make the inference from the interviews and survey questions that teachers and administrators are mostly in agreement with what skills are important for students to become ready for kindergarten. Let's see. There we go. The last part of my research question looks at the implications of the different views of preschool teachers and administrators. When we look at the data that has been collected so far, it would imply that for the most part, preschool teachers and administrators have similar beliefs and understandings of the preschool classroom. However, analysis of some other questions indicate that there may be a division between teachers and administrators. One question on the survey asked if the group believed they shared the same beliefs towards developmentally appropriate practice and kindergarten readiness as their counterparts. 100% of administrators answered yes to this question. However, only 44% of teachers said yes, 44% of teachers said no, and 11% were unsure. When looking at the interviews, the teacher participants were asked if they ever disagreed with administration on what they felt was appropriate for their students. All teachers answered this question with at least a yes. Administrators were asked if they ever disagreed with their preschool teachers, but both administrators answered with a no. On both the surveys and the interviews, the participants were asked to answer what their biggest challenge was when working with their counterparts. Because this was a qualitative question, the answers are coded into different categories. You can see the responses of the participants on figures 4 and 5. Figure 5, right here, looks at administrative answers. Many of them focused on more administrative challenges such as size of the classrooms and supplies and funding. The biggest response dealt with the behavior of the students in the classroom with responses such as behavior management, assisting them with children with challenging behaviors, and consistent behavior strategies. Time was also seen as a challenge with answers such as providing planning time without interruptions and half-day sessions. Figure 4 shows the responses of preschool teachers. Here. The biggest concern noted by preschool teachers was the lack of understanding of preschool regulations by their administration. Responses included administration does not have enough knowledge of early childhood education to make realistic goals and expectations, and they do not understand how preschool works. Communication was also noted as a big concern for many of the teachers, with some of the teachers responding with unavailability, they're only involved from afar, or not involved with teachers directly, so communication is not good. A few of the teachers even mentioned the challenges of administrator views of preschool, responding that preschool is often viewed as unimportant and babysitting, and they don't recognize preschool as a teaching environment. The data from the preschool teachers indicates that for this group, there are concerns with the relationship with their administrators. There seems to be a divide between teachers and their administration. Looking back at the literature, we can make some connections between the literature and the data collected. The first part of the literature looked at the purpose and importance of preschool. When we look back at the literature for this particular area, we can remember that Kentucky preschool regulations, as well as the Individuals with Disability Education Act, allowed for students that come from families that are considered high risk to attend state-funded preschool programs. The literature also established the importance of preschool because of the short and long-term benefits it provided to students. Figure 1, as we've seen right here, show the responses of participants on the importance of preschool, in which most agree that the purpose was to help those students who were considered high risk. The second area of literature was looking at what developmentally appropriate practice was. Koppel and Brennekamp suggested the importance of using developmentally appropriate practice in their preschool classroom. All teachers and administrators in the survey and interviews indicated that they were familiar with the term of developmentally appropriate practice. The question asked to several participants was a multiple choice question that asked them to choose the definition they thought best described that term. And an overwhelming majority chose the definition based on NACE as indicated in Figure 2. And then the third area of literature was looking at the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards and kindergarten readiness. The literature explained that the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards address skills in all developmental areas as well as various academic areas. When looking at the data, all teachers, including those within the interviews, indicated that they use the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards in their creation of instruction. 89% of preschool teachers and 100% of administrators within the surveys indicated that they felt the Kentucky Early Childhood Standards were developmentally appropriate for preschool, and all participants in the interviews indicated they were developmentally appropriate. The literature also tells us about the screener used for students who are enrolled in the kindergarten, the Brigance. The scores for the Brigance help to determine if a child is considered ready for school. Within the data, the teachers and administrators were asked to identify the skills and behaviors they believe to be important for kindergarten readiness as shown in Figure 3. So if we go back, if we go back to the original research question, the first part of the question asks, how do administrators and preschool teachers define developmentally appropriate practice in Kentucky preschool classrooms? We can see from our data that the majority of administrators and teachers agreed on the definition provided by the NAEYC as the definition. Those within the interviews also identified important terms within the definition. This raises the question, then, why did 55% of preschool teachers answer no or unsure when asked if they shared the same beliefs as their administrators on developmentally appropriate practice in kindergarten readiness? Could it be that teachers and administrators are not agreeing on the best manner to teach skills and behaviors? Could it be that despite sharing the same definition, teachers and administrators differ in the agreement of the level of skills that their students should know? These questions might be asked if deeper research was conducted that would look into the framework of preschool classrooms. The second part of the question asks what implications may these views have on classroom instruction. The data in this research indicates that both teachers and administrators see the importance of preschool and they share similar ideas on what skills and behaviors are important. Perhaps the biggest implication may be that communication and collaboration should be sought by both groups to gain a better understanding. Teachers and administrators both listed challenges. In order to overcome these challenges, the lines of communication need to open up. Greg Einrich, in his article from 2015, How We Know Collaboration Works, stated that research consistently finds that a high degree of trust between administrators and teachers is an essential ingredient in making successful schools tick. After looking at the data and research from this study, what are the implications for the future? For me personally, I take this as a challenge to do what I can to increase my communication with my colleagues in administration so that I can help my students achieve their goals. Looking back at my professional growth plan, I wanted to continue research and study for what I can do to make my classroom one that is appropriate and challenging for my students. This study has allowed me to see that part of making an appropriate classroom is communication with administration. As part of my professional growth plan, I will make the effort to reach out to my administrators on a bi-weekly basis to discuss any questions or concerns I have with my classroom. I'll also make sure to discuss what is developmentally appropriate for my classroom and the students that I have with administration during my grade level meetings that are held within the school every few months. When looking at the implications for the future in relation to the broader educational system, it is important to continue this research. I would like to reach out to organizations that work with a large number of preschool teachers and administrators to increase the number of participants for surveys and interviews that would give a more generalized idea of how preschool teachers and administrators agree and disagree. If a larger study can be conducted, it would benefit to present this information to the professional community of teachers and administration so that they may make changes within their own schools to improve communication. This can be done in a variety of manners, perhaps through scheduled meetings at regular intervals that would allow for teachers and administration to discuss any issues or challenges they are facing. If time is an issue, perhaps an email communication could be established. The reason we are in this profession is for the success of our students, and we owe it to them to do what we can to make our schools successful, for in return, our students will be successful as well.